One brisk morning in September, James arrived early to open his shop. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, flicking on the lights. He moved through the aisles, straightening shelves and setting up the day's display. Among the items on the counter was a rack of hats, some with slogans supporting environmental conservation, others promoting local pride. But one hat stood out. A bright red MAGA hat with the words "Make America Great Again" emblazoned across the front. James had started selling the hats a few months ago, after a regular customer requested one. Over time, more people began asking for them, and James, always practical, decided to keep them in stock. To him, the hats were just another product, no different from the "Coexist" bumper stickers or the rainbow flags he also sold. He believed in creating a space where everyone felt represented. As the day began, James greeted his first few customers, chatting warmly as they picked up their groceries and supplies. But by mid-morning, the atmosphere in the store shifted. A small group of college students entered, their chatter quieting as they noticed the MAGA hat on display. One of them, a young woman with a determined expression, pointed toward it. "Can you believe he's selling that here?" she whispered to her friends. "What kind of message does that send?" The group lingered near the counter, their whispers growing louder. Finally, the woman approached James, her arms crossed. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp. "Do you really think it's appropriate to sell those hats here?" James looked up from the box he was unpacking, his expression calm but curious. "Morning," he said. "Is there something wrong with the hat?" "Something wrong," she repeated, her voice rising. "Those hats represent hate. They stand for division, and everything that's wrong with this country." James straightened, meeting her gaze evenly. "I sell a lot of things in this store," he said. "Some people like them, some people don't. But I don't decide what to sell based on politics. I sell what people ask for." "That's a cop-out," another student chimed in. "You're taking a side whether you admit it or not." James's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone steady. "I'm not here to take sides. This store is for everyone in Greenhaven, no matter what they believe." The young woman scoffed, turning to her friends. "Unbelievable. No wonder this town is stuck in the past." With that, they stormed out, the bell above the door ringing sharply in their wake. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had been through this before, but it never got easier. Over the next few days, the tension escalated. Word spread quickly through the town about the MAGA hats, and soon, a small group of protesters began gathering outside the store. They held signs with slogans like "No Hate in Greenhaven" and "Boycott MAGA." Customers hesitated at the door, some turning away entirely. Inside the store, James tried to focus on his work, but the protests weighed on him. He could hear their chants through the windows, and the sight of reporters snapping photos made his stomach churn. One afternoon, as James was restocking shelves, Claire Peterson, the leader of the protest group, entered the store. She was a passionate young activist known for organizing demonstrations and speaking out against social injustices in the town. She walked straight up to the counter, her eyes blazing. "Mr. Wyatt," she began, her tone firm but controlled, "we need to talk." James set down the jar he was holding and crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Claire gestured toward the MAGA hats. "You know how much pain those represent to people in this community. Selling them sends a message, whether you mean to or not. And it's not a good one." James sighed. "Claire, I've known you since you were a kid. You've been coming to this store for years. Have you ever felt unwelcome here?" Claire hesitated but shook her head. "No, but that's not the point. It's not about me. It's about what those hats stand for." "And what about the people who feel differently?" James asked. "Should I stop selling something just because some people don't like it? Where do I draw the line?" Claire's jaw tightened. "You draw the line at hate. That's what those hats represent." James leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Claire, this store is for everyone. If I start picking and choosing who I serve, or what I sell based on politics, I'm no longer running a store. I'm running a platform. That's not what this place is about." Claire stared at him for a long moment before stepping back. "If you won't take a stand, Mr. Wyatt, we will." She turned and left, her group outside cheering as she rejoined them. James watched from the window, his chest heavy. As the days passed, the protests grew larger. Customers stopped coming, and sales plummeted. Longtime patrons avoided the store, not wanting to get caught in the middle of the controversy. The once bustling shop now felt eerily empty. James tried to keep his composure, but the situation was taking a toll. He worked late into the evenings, organizing shelves that no one was shopping from, and his nights were restless with worry. One evening, as he sat alone in the dimly lit store, the bell above the door jingled. James looked up to see Henry Larson, a retired teacher and respected town elder, step inside. "Evening, James," Henry said, his voice warm but tinged with concern. He leaned on his cane as he approached the counter. "Evening, Henry," James replied, managing a small smile. "What brings you in this late?" Henry surveyed the empty store, his brow furrowing. "I've been watching what's been going on, and I figured you could use a friendly face." James chuckled dryly. "Friendly faces are getting scarce around here." Henry's gaze softened. "This store has been a cornerstone of Greenhaven for decades, James. You've always been fair, always treated everyone with respect. But this is bigger than just hats. It's about how people feel." James sighed, leaning against the counter. "I'm just trying to run a store, Henry. I never wanted this to turn into a battlefield." "I know," Henry said. "But sometimes you can't avoid the fight. People need to see that you care about this town, about the people in it. Maybe it's time to remind them of what Larkspur Goods really stands for." James nodded slowly, Henry's words settling in his mind like seeds waiting to grow. "Thanks, Henry. I'll think about it." The next morning, James woke with a renewed sense of determination. If the store was going to be at the center of this division, then it could also be the place where healing began. He reached out to Claire, surprising her with a phone call. "Claire, it's James Wyatt," he began. "I've been thinking about what you said. You're right, this store is more than just a business. It's a part of this community, and I want to do something to bring us together." Claire's voice was cautious but curious. "What are you suggesting?" "I want to host a town meeting," James said. "Right here in the store. No protests, no signs, just people talking. Let's get everyone together to share their perspectives and figure out how we move forward as a community." Claire hesitated. "You really think that'll work?" "I don't know," James admitted. "But we have to try." After a pause, Claire agreed. Together, they began planning the event, spreading the word to every corner of Greenhaven. Flyers went up around town, social media posts invited everyone, and James personally reached out to longtime customers, encouraging them to come. The night of the meeting, the store was transformed. Shelves were pushed aside to make space for rows of chairs, and a table at the front held coffee and pastries. Slowly, people began to trickle in. Families, college students, retirees, and local business owners. The air was thick with tension, but there was also a sense of anticipation. James stood at the front of the room, his heart pounding as he faced the crowd. Claire stood beside him, her expression guarded but supportive. Taking a deep breath, James began to speak. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I know there's been a lot of disagreement lately, and this store has become part of that. But tonight isn't about hats or protests, it's about us. This town has always been stronger together, and I believe we still can be." He stepped back, inviting others to share their thoughts. One by one, people stood up to speak. A college student talked about feeling unwelcome in Greenhaven because of their political views. An older farmer shared how the MAGA hat symbolized hope for his struggling family. A single mother expressed frustration at the growing divide in the town, and her hope for a better example for her kids. The conversations were raw and emotional, filled with both anger and vulnerability. At times, voices rose, but James and Claire worked together to keep the discussion respectful. By the end of the night, something remarkable had happened. People were listening. They weren't necessarily agreeing, but they were hearing each other in a way that hadn't happened in years. As the crowd began to disperse, Claire approached James. "I have to admit," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips, "I didn't think this would work. But it feels like progress." James smiled back, exhaustion and relief washing over him. "It's a start." In the weeks that followed, the store became a symbol of reconciliation. James continued to stock a variety of products, from MAGA hats to progressive pins, but the focus shifted to what Larkspur Goods had always been about, a place for everyone. The protests faded, replaced by renewed support from the community. Customers returned, not just to shop but to reconnect with their neighbors. One evening, as James locked up the store, he found a note slipped under the door. It was from Claire. The message was simple but heartfelt. "Thank you for listening, and for reminding us what Greenhaven can be." James stood in the quiet of the empty street, the note in his hand, and a small smile on his face. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The divide hadn't disappeared, but a bridge had been built. And for James, that was enough to keep going.